So you want a bike GPS, but you are on a bit of a budget. Two of the very strongest candidates are going to be the Brighton Rider 420 and the Lezyne Mega XL, also the Mega C. It's basically the same, just different hardware. Well, good news. I've dug out my units and I've run them through a few tests, and today I'm going to help you decide what to buy. This is not an exhaustive review, but it should show you the broad strengths and weaknesses of these units. So let's jump in. The hardware is an interesting one because they are imperfect in their own way. Let's start with mounts. Both ship with their own sort of standard on-bar mount, with out-front options available at an extra cost. The Brighton uses a sort of chopped Garmin style mount, but it doesn't really fit properly into Garmin mounts. You can get them in, but it isn't held rigidly. So any of your sort of back catalog of Garmin mounts probably don't rely on being able to use those with the Rider 420. The Lezyne, on the other hand, has a highly proprietary mount that's kind of shaped like an X, and you cannot use it with anything else. So you have to invest in a new set of mounts for the Lezyne. So the Brighton wins the battle of the mounts because it is less proprietary. Screens are another point of demarcation between the two, with the Lezyne being bigger, but the Brighton probably being the one that's more easy to read. Neither of them have color, but the Brighton has sort of more contrast, and I do find it's just a little bit easier on the eye. I do very much enjoy Lezyne's landscape mode though, because it means you can just pack so much information onto the screen. I'm going to call this battle of the screens a draw because I actually prefer the Brighton to look at, but I think that the Lezyne fits more on it and is more useful generally. Button function is another case of choosing your imperfections. They're both annoying in their own particular way. The Brighton has quite a clean and minimalist face on it, but that is at the expense of button location. It has a couple of buttons on the bottom corners, and it has two more that are behind the unit. As you'd expect, that gets quite awkward because you have to remember what they do. And I've made plenty of mistakes stopping rides and doing weird things because I forgot what each button did. Operating the Lezyne with its buttons is a little bit awkward as well because there are 4 of them and they all sort of pull double duty depending on whether you press and hold or whether you just sort of press it shortly. 2 of the buttons do have arrows on them, but those arrows mean you go up and down in the menus. If you want to go up and down through the pages, you use 2 different buttons. So yeah, it's quite a tough one to wrap your head around. Also, when you run the unit in landscape mode, the button layout doesn't change except in some of the menus where it does. So keeping all of these things in your mind while you're using the unit can be quite challenging. Thankfully, at least the menus do rotate in landscape mode. They didn't when the unit first launched, and then they fixed it soon after, which is a really nice thing to have done because that was annoying. Again, I'm going to call it a draw between the two because they're both unintuitive, just in different ways. The last thing for hardware is battery life. You get 48 hours from the Mega XL and still a very generous 35 for the Brighton. Both of them are huge and you're unlikely to run them dead unless you just never charge them. I think the hardware battle is going to have to go to the Brighton. It's a bit more compact, it's quite a lot smaller. The Lezyne, you know, despite the fact that I do like the screen and I do like that it can run in landscape mode, it's just such a big, hefty unit. They're both a little bit annoying to operate with their buttons, but I'd say the Brighton is the sort of sleeker one, so hardware wins there. Let's talk phone apps, and both units are surprisingly good on that front. Lezyne has GPS Ally and Brighton has Brighton Active. If I had to pick a winner between the two, I'd say probably the Brighton is the slightly easier to use. Both can set up your data screens, can create routes, change general settings on the device, and do a few other things that make your life just that little bit easier. I think they're both really good for the price of these units, and I appreciate the time that has been put into that, especially given that Garmin doesn't really have an equivalent despite being the market leader and selling at such a high price point. I'd say that the Lezyne app is a bit more fiddly. Things aren't quite as intuitive. I wrapped my head around the Brighton a lot quicker, and I just find it a little bit easier to do all of the small tasks that you need to do when you're changing things with your GPS. You can also review your rides on the apps, and they act as a bridge to other services if you connect them. An important thing to note though is the Lezyne is quite reliant on its browser-based service called GPS Route. That is where you do your maps and your route management. I'll cover this in more detail below, but it is worth noting that there are several things that you can't do on the Lezyne app that you do need a computer for. When it comes to apps then, it's another strong showing for the Brighton. Okay, let's get into the meatiness of maps and navigation now. Both units take a very different approach, but right at the top, if maps are mandatory for you, then you have to have the Lezyne. There are no maps on the Rider 420. Instead, they've chosen breadcrumb navigation, so you can load your routes in, and you just have to keep an eye on your GPS to know whether you're following it. Admittedly, you do get prompts to turn and prompts when you're off course, so as long as you're paying attention, you can navigate with it, but in places where there's a lot of complexity, or if you're riding through a trail network, it can be very difficult to use breadcrumbs alone. When it comes to getting routes onto your device though, Brighton has much stronger integrations. They use Strava, Komoot, and Ride with GPS, and you can get your whole library of routes onto the device through the phone app, and that is super handy. Lezine then do have the superior mapping and navigation features because you can get free worldwide maps with a little bit of manual handling. You use the GPS route website to sort of drag a box around a admittedly quite large area, which then exports that mapping data out into a file, and you drag and drop that onto your device. I do like this system, even though it is quite manual, and there is a generous amount of storage on here, so you can put a huge amount of maps on. If you want to just keep adding more and more to it, the maps do stay in there. GPS route is the only bridge to get routes from other services into your device, and this is quite clunky. You have to take a TCX or a GPX from your other services and then upload it into GPS route, which can then make it available to transfer from your phone onto your device. I don't love this system. It kind of involves double and triple handling things. It's a bit of a bummer, but you know, it has maps. So yeah, you kind of have to just go with it. There is some sort of new Komoot based feature. I haven't really had much of a look at it and haven't tested it, so I won't really pass judgment on it at this stage. Overall, when it comes to maps and navigation, the Lezine has to win because it has maps. In terms of routes and sort of integrations with other systems, the Brighton is clearly the better. You just got to pick what you value most and go with it. Strava segments is another pretty clear win for the Lezine. The Brighton doesn't do it. Jumping back in to test the Lezine again after not using it for about a year, they have even sort of done some improvements to the Strava live segments, so that's good to see. It's a system that generally works very well. It'll track you against your PR or the KOM or whatever, and yeah, it runs a lot like a Strava live segment system on other GPSs. So good work, Lezine. There were some occasional unreliabilities in my initial test period a couple of years ago where some segments just wouldn't work and they wouldn't track you against a PR or a KOM. When I reached out to Lezine a couple of years ago about it, they said it's because those segments were flagged, which was kind of nonsense because some of them were just standard hill climbs that were not unsafe in any way, and there's nobody flagging them in Adelaide. So yeah, I don't really know what to make of that. So generally speaking, the live segments have worked in my testing today, but there may be some instances where they don't. Now, the ride experience with both of them is pretty much fine. Neither really stands out as particularly better or worse than the other. The Brighton is lightning quick to start up and does connect to satellites very quickly, and I appreciate that. It's ready to go super fast. The screens on both of them are readable most of the time, but they do tend to get a bit glary, so if the sun is on the right angle, they do kind of mirror the light right into your face, which is not always fun. Notification sounds on them are both quite subtle, which is a nice change from the Garmin Shriek. Going back to the hardware though, it is a little bit awkward to do things like change screens or sort of navigate through the units while you're riding. This one, because you have to remember what all the buttons are and sort of what orientation you're in. This one is not only because of the buttons on the back, it's because there's only a down button, so you can't go up in menus or up through pages. You kind of have to keep going down until you end up back where you want it to be. I do like having the maps on this unit again, and it does mark out the route you're following with little sort of chevrons. It's pretty easy to follow and you can't really go too wrong with that. Breadcrumb on this one, it works fine, I guess, but you do need to pay a bit of attention to it. After the ride, both of the units will upload via Bluetooth and share it across to your connected platforms. They also do have inbuilt native ride analysis features, but you know, come on, we're all using Strava for that, right? The Brighton does perform much more seamlessly in terms of connecting and uploading. It just sort of all happens automatically, which is very nice. The Lezine was clunky. I had to sort of manually connect to it. I had to manually tell it to upload, and yeah, that kind of slowed everything down, which was a bit of a bummer. So after ride uploading is a clear win to the Brighton. And now that we're done with riding, it is time to make a decision. This is a tough one because they are both strong and weak in their own ways. I do think they are good units on the whole, but don't expect perfection at this price point, or any price point really. There are more quirks in them than you will find in more expensive units though. With that all in mind, I would say the Brighton is probably the better experience overall. Just in day-to-day usage, everything is a little bit quicker, easier, and more seamless. It just sort of saves you time every time you need to do something. The Lezyne needs more manual operations to make things happen, and that kind of just gets a little bit annoying every time you have to do it, because everything is slightly slower. But I am still going to take the Lezyne because of the maps. I just find that I've become so reliant on them now. The unit can annoy me in plenty of other ways, and I will just forgive it because of maps. I ride in a lot of areas that are unfamiliar because I do a lot of gravel biking nowadays. So yeah, I kind of need them. If you don't need maps, then the Brighton is the better experience than the Mega XL and even the Mega C, again, because they're basically the same. And that is where I'm going to wrap things up. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you so much for coming. I've got plenty of other GPS reviews, and they tend to be the most popular things on my platform. So click around and watch some other content while you're here. Ride safe, stay healthy, and I will see you next time.